All right, so are you ready to dive into a world where words have power and darkness is like a constant threat?
And reality, well, let's just say it's flexible.
You want to explore that.
Yeah.
This is what we call the Remedyverse, right?
Yeah.
This web of connections between games like Alan Wake, Control, we got Alan Wake's American Nightmare, and even Max Payne 2.
Right.
We got some crazy stuff to go through today.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we've got pages from a mysterious manuscript,
Oh, yeah.
transcripts from Alan Wake 2, and even some blog posts that are frankly a little creepy.
Well, what's fascinating about the Remedyverse is that it's not just about monsters and jump scares, you know? It's
Right.
about the power of stories and how they can shape reality and this constant struggle against forces that want to control those narratives, you know?
Yeah.
You'll find yourself questioning how much control we really have over our own stories, over our own realities.
That's already giving me goosebumps. And to guide us through this labyrinth, we have an expert who's practically written the encyclopedia on the Remedyverse.
Oh, well, let's start with the elephant in the room, or rather, the monster cloud with a face.
Okay.
The dark presence.
Yeah.
This is like the puppet master behind a lot of the strange happenings in these games.
Right.
Think of it as a force that manipulates people, twists reality to its liking, and seems to have a particular fondness for a certain mysterious lake that keeps cropping up.
You're not kidding about the creepy factor.
Yeah.
Alan Wake 2 describes this thing as a monster cloud with a face.
Yeah.
That image alone is enough to fuel a few nightmares.
Right.
And then, plus it seems connected to the Taken, those possessed enemies you encounter throughout the games.
Right.
And is turning people into those things.
That's a question that we'll be unpacking as we go, but you have to remember the dark presence feeds on negativity.
Oh.
Fear, anxiety.
Yeah.
It warps people, twists them into something monstrous.
Okay.
It's not just about physical possession. It's about taking control of someone's story, their very identity.
So it's like a cosmic horror story meets a psychological thriller.
Exactly.
No wonder you're so fascinated by this stuff.
And speaking of psychological thrillers, that brings us to our main man, Alan Wake.
Yes.
A writer whose words literally have the power to rewrite reality.
Okay, every writer's dream.
All right.
But also potentially a nightmare, especially considering what happens in Alan Wake 2.
Yeah.
He's trapped in this dark place for 13 years, still battling the dark presence.
Yeah.
Talk about writer's block.
I know. And what's intriguing is he's fixated on this clicker.
Yeah.
A simple light switch, you know?
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier you were drawn to the idea of stories shaping reality. Well, the clicker is a key to that, you see.
Okay.
It's about controlling the narrative, turning the light on, pushing back against the darkness.
So it's not just about physical light, but about knowledge versus ignorance.
Yeah.
Hope versus despair.
Exactly.
You're making me see this whole clicker thing in a new light. No
Yeah.
pun intended.
It's about the power of choice, you know?
Right.
The ability to shape our own narratives even when surrounded by darkness.
Speaking of shaping narratives, we have this very intriguing character, Thomas Zane, whose story we uncover through the This House of Dreams blog.
All right.
He's a poet who seems to be connected to the same dark force that haunts Alan Wake.
Zane's poems are more than just spooky verses.
Okay.
They suggest he understood the true nature of the dark presence, maybe even learned to manipulate it a little bit.
Uh-huh.
He writes about creating a baby universe, you know,
Wow.
a safe haven within the darkness. Think about it, creating a whole new reality with just your words. That's some serious power.
Okay, that's blowing my mind a little. It's like he found a loophole in the dark presence's control.
Exactly. And if we connect this to your interest in the overarching connections, it raises a very important question.
Okay.
Did Zane succeed?
Right.
Is this baby universe somewhere within the Remedyverse?
Whoa.
We don't know.
I never thought of it that way.
And here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
The dark presence isn't the only one meddling with reality. We have Mr. Scratch,
Yeah.
Alan Wake's doppelganger, who appears in Alan Wake's American Nightmare and even in Control.
Yeah, Mr. Scratch is creepy with a capital C.
Yeah.
But he's not just some harmless copycat, right?
No.
He's described as being able to break a bureau containment unit in the control files.
Right.
That sounds seriously dangerous.
Exactly. Mr. Scratch isn't just a reflection.
Right.
He's a hostile entity with his own agenda.
Right.
He wants to control powerful objects, manipulate events, and even influence Alan himself.
Yeah.
Remember that sense of unease you mentioned earlier?
Uh-huh.
Scratch embodies that, you know.
Right.
He's a walking, talking reminder that even our own identities can be twisted and manipulated.
Okay, that's enough to make anyone sleep with the lights on, but how does Mr. Scratch fit into the bigger picture?
Right.
Is he working with the dark presence, or is he another player in this cosmic game?
That's a question we'll be exploring further, but the Remedyverse is full of these layers you see,
All right.
these interconnected threads that tie the games together in unexpected ways.
And speaking of interconnected threads, remember that recurring location, the Ocean View Hotel?
Oh, yeah.
It pops up in both Alan Wake and Alan Wake's American Nightmare. And it always seems to be at the heart of some pretty strange happenings.
The Ocean View Hotel is more than just a building.
Right.
It's a symbol of transition, a crossroads.
Yeah.
Think of it as a gateway between the real and the surreal, where characters are forced to confront their past, their fears, and ultimately their destinies.
So it's not just a coincidence. It's a deliberate choice by Remedy to connect these games.
Right.
To create a sense of continuity and a shared history.
Precisely. And if you look closely at the details, you'll find other recurring symbols.
Right.
Other echoes of events and characters that bridge the gaps between the games.
You're really making me want to go back and play these games with a magnifying glass. But before we get lost in the details, let's talk about another recurring motif. The well-lit room.
Right.
It's mentioned in Zane's poems as a safe haven, a place of refuge from the darkness.
Right.
And it also appears in Alan Wake.
The well-lit room is a powerful symbol of hope and resilience.
Okay.
It represents the idea that even in the darkest of places, there's always the possibility of finding light, of creating a space where we can feel safe and whole.
It's like a reminder that even when surrounded by darkness, we have the power to create our own light,
Exactly.
to build our own safe havens. That's a pretty powerful message.
And it ties into the theme of personal agency, of taking control of our own narratives, which you expressed an interest in.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together, but before we get too deep into the philosophical weeds, let's talk about the Federal Bureau of Control.
Okay.
They play a major role in Control,
Right.
but they're also hinted at in the other games, right?
The FBC is like the Men in Black of the Remedyverse.
Okay.
They investigate paranormal phenomena, contain altered world events, and generally try to keep the lid on things that go bump in the night.
And there's a direct connection between Control and Alan Wake through the AWE, the Altered World event, that ties back to Bright Falls. It's like they're shouting from the rooftops, hey, this is all connected.
Exactly. The AWE is a pivotal moment for anyone trying to understand the Remedyverse.
Right.
It confirms that these events are not isolated incidents. They're part of a larger pattern, a web of interconnected events that the FBC is trying to unravel.
Okay, my head is officially starting to spin, but in a good way.
Good.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture, the way these games fit together, the recurring motifs and themes that tie it all together.
And we're just scratching the surface. There are layers upon layers to uncover, connections to explore, and plenty of unanswered questions that will keep us guessing. But that's what makes the Remedyverse so compelling.
Before we move on, there's one more piece of the puzzle. We need to address a bit of a wild card entry. Max Payne 2.
Okay.
Do you remember that dream sequence where Max encounters a woman who looks an awful lot like Alice Wake?
Yes, a blink and you'll miss it moment.
Right.
But knowing Remedy's love of interconnected storytelling, it feels like a deliberate clue. A subtle nod to the larger universe they were already building even back then.
So even their earliest games are part of this grand tapestry that's amazing. It makes you wonder how far back these connections go, how deep this rabbit hole really is.
And that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Remedyverse. We've covered a lot of ground, but there are still plenty of threads to untangle.
My mind is already buzzing with all these connections. It's like we're piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle, and every piece reveals something new and intriguing.
Exactly. And remember how we were discussing the idea of the subconscious playing a role in all of this?
Yeah.
Well, let's explore that further. Think back to that dream sequence in Max Payne 2, the one with the woman resembling Alice Wake,
Right.
Dreams are more than just random firings in the brain in the Remedyverse.
Yeah.
They're glimpses into the subconscious, a way for characters to confront their deepest fears and desires.
You're right. It's like the games are saying that reality isn't just what we see with our eyes,
Right.
but also what we perceive with our minds.
Yeah.
And that perception can be influenced, manipulated, even rewritten.
Precisely. And who or what has the power to manipulate those perceptions? That's a question that lies at the heart of the Remedyverse. Remember that line from Alan Wake 2? He'd be caught, murdered, they got him, they didn't get him, he was reborn out of hate.
Yeah. It's giving me chills just thinking about it.
Right.
Is Remedy suggesting that the dark presence has been around for centuries, feeding on human negativity, our fears and anxieties?
It certainly raises the stakes. The Dark Presence isn't just a one-off villain.
Right.
It's a force that's been shaping events from the shadows for who knows how long.
That's a pretty terrifying thought.
It is.
Right.
And remember that description of it as a monster cloud with a face?
Yeah.
That image isn't just random. It's a manifestation of our collective fears.
Right.
Our anxieties about the unknown.
Okay, I'm officially sleeping with the lights on tonight. But it's not just the dark presence that's unsettling.
Right.
What about the Taken? They're not just mindless monsters, are they?
They're not.
They seem to retain some connection to their former selves.
You're right. There are moments in Alan Wake, for example, where you see glimpses of their memories, their regrets. You know, it's heartbreaking, really. It reminds us that even when consumed by darkness, there's still a spark of humanity in there somewhere.
I like to think I'd fight back, but honestly, I'd probably be frozen in fear.
Well, that's why we have heroes like Alan Wake and Jesse Faden, right?
Right.
They're the ones who stand up to the darkness, who fight for the light, even when all hope seems lost.
It's like a message of resilience, of the importance of fighting for what we believe in, even when the odds are stacked against us. And it highlights the importance of connection, of having people we can rely on when things get tough.
You've hit on a crucial point. We see this theme of connection throughout the Remedy. Alan and Alice support each other through their ordeal, and Jessie relies on her allies at the FBC. In the face of darkness, connection can be a lifeline, a reminder that we're not alone.
Speaking of the FBC, we've talked about the AWE and Control that directly links to Bright Falls and Alan Wake.
Yeah.
But are there other connections between the games and the FBC?
Absolutely. Keep in mind the FBC's mission is to investigate and contain altered world events. So it makes sense that they would be aware of Alan Wake and the events in Bright Falls, even if they weren't directly involved at that point in the timeline.
So they're like the secret keepers,
Yeah.
the ones who know about the things that go bump in the night but keep it all under wraps.
Exactly. And if you look closely at Control, you'll find documents and recordings that hint at the FBC's knowledge of other AWEs, other paranatural events that haven't yet been fully revealed. You know, it's like they're always one step mid,
Right.
trying to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's not just about containing the immediate threat. It's about understanding the bigger picture, the patterns and connections between these events.
Precisely. And the FBC's involvement in the Remedyverse raises a lot of questions. What else do they know?
Right.
What are they hiding? And how far will they go to protect their secrets?
Okay, now I'm starting to feel like I need to go back and replay all these games with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah.
There's so many layers to this universe, so much to discover.
And that's what makes the Remedyverse so fascinating. It's a puzzle box that keeps on revealing new secrets and connections with each playthrough. But it's not just about the puzzles and the mysteries.
Right.
It's also about the human element.
You're right. The Remedyverse isn't just about fighting monsters. It's about the characters, their relationships, their struggles, their triumphs. It's about what it means to be human in a world where reality itself can be rewritten.
And that brings us back to the power of stories. Remember, in the Remedyverse, words have power. They can shape reality, influence perception, and even rewrite history.
Right.
Think about Alan literally writing his way out of trouble, or Thomas Zane using poetry to shape reality.
It's like they're tapping into a primal force, a power that lies dormant within us all.
And it raises the question, what stories are we telling ourselves?
Yeah.
What narratives are shaping our own realities, and what power do we have to change those stories?
Okay, now you're really making me think, but before we get too philosophical, I have to ask about something that's been bugging me.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that the Remedyverse blends different genres. I can definitely see the psychological thriller and the supernatural horror,
Yeah.
but I'm also getting a sense of something else, something cosmic.
You're perceptive, it's subtle, but it's there.
Oh.
Think about the dark presence. It's not just a malevolent spirit or a demon.
Yeah.
It's something ancient, something vast and unknowable.
Right.
There are hints of Lovecraftian cosmic horror woven into the fabric of the Remedyverse.
That explains the creeping sense of dread I get whenever the dark presence is mentioned.
Yeah.
It's like a glimpse into something that's beyond human comprehension, something that defies our understanding of the universe.
Exactly. And that element of cosmic horror adds another layer of complexity to the Remedyverse.
Right.
It expands the scope of the narrative, raising the stakes and making us question our place in the grand scheme of things.
It's like realizing that the monsters under the bed aren't the scariest things out there. There are much bigger, more terrifying things lurking in the shadows of the cosmos.
And that's a perfect segue into our next discussion point,
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the Remedyverse.
where the lines between reality and nightmare blur and the power of stories can rewrite the very fabric of existence.
We've journeyed through interconnected games, uncovered recurring motifs, and even pondered the nature of reality itself. But there's still a few loose ends to tie up a few mysteries to unravel.
And a few more chills to send down your spine.
Speaking of chills, let's talk about those deer.
Okay.
They're everywhere in the Remedyverse. Alan Wake, Control, even that creepy blog, This House of Dreams. What's the deal with the deer?
You're right to notice that deer often symbolize a connection to nature,
Yeah.
to the wild, untamed aspects of ourselves.
Right.
But in the Remedyverse, they take on a darker, more sinister meaning.
Yeah, those deer masks worn by the taken-in Alan Wake are definitely not your friendly neighborhood Bambi.
No, not at all. Think about it. They represent a perversion of nature, a twisting of something pure and innocent into something monstrous.
Yeah.
And in Control, the deer is associated with the astral plane, a realm that's both beautiful and dangerous.
Like a siren's call, alluring you into a place where you might not come back the same.
Exactly. The deer becomes a symbol of duality, the light and shadow within nature, the beauty and terror that can coexist. It reminds us that the unknown can be both fascinating and terrifying.
Okay, moving from deer to something that always gives me the creeps, the number 13.
Oh, yeah.
It seems to pop up everywhere in these games. 13 years, Alan is trapped in the dark place. 13 steps in a ritual mentioned in This House of Dreams. Coincidence?
I don't think so.
I think not.
The number 13 is often associated with bad luck disruption. The unknown in the Remedyverse, it seems to mark the intrusion of the supernatural into the ordinary, you know?
Right.
The moments when those boundaries between reality and nightmare crack open.
It's like a little red flag whispering, pay attention, things are about to get weird. And you know what else is weird?
What's that?
The hints of time travel or time manipulation in Alan Wake, it seems like the dark presence can mess with the past. And Control has those strange time loops and echoes.
Ah, yes. Time is not a simple line in the Remedyverse.
Right.
It's fluid, malleable, that opens up some really mind-bending possibilities for the story.
It's like those time travel movies where you're never quite sure what's cause and what's effect, and it makes you wonder about free will,
Right.
if the past can be changed, if the future isn't fixed. How much control do we really have?
That's one of the core questions the Remedyverse keeps asking, free will versus determinism. Are we making choices, or are we just playing out roles in a script we can't see?
Heavy stuff. These games aren't just entertainment. They're like philosophy wrapped in a psychological thriller. But speaking of thrillers, let's talk about the ending of Alan Wake.
Okay.
It's ambiguous, right?
It is.
We don't know for sure if he escaped the dark place or if he's still trapped there.
That open ending is a stroke of genius. You
Yeah.
know, it keeps us guessing, wanting more. And it sets the stage perfectly for Alan Wake 2.
It's like Remedy is saying, the story doesn't end here. There's
Yep.
always another layer, another mystery to uncover. And speaking of mysteries, the ending of Control also leaves a lot of questions hanging.
Jesse contains the hiss, but the threat isn't gone. And the FBC, well, they're still shrouded in secrecy.
Right.
What are their true motives? What else are they hiding?
It's like there's this whole other world operating in the shadows, pulling the strings, which leads us to the big question, what's next for the Remedyverse?
Well, Alan Wake 2 promises to dive even deeper into the dark place, and we've already seen hints of new characters and threats.
Right.
And Control's world is ripe for sequels or spin-offs. Imagine exploring more AWEs or delving into the board's secrets.
Okay, you've officially convinced me to add replay all Remedy games to my to-do list. But before we wrap up, I want to highlight something you said earlier, the idea that stories have power.
Yes,
It's not just a plot device. It feels like a core theme of the Remedyverse.
it's at the very heart of it. Think about Alan literally writing his way out of trouble, or Zane using poetry to shape reality.
Right.
These games are reminding us that stories can shape our perceptions, change our world.
So the next time you're feeling lost or trapped, remember the Remedyverse. Remember that you have the power to rewrite your own story.
Choose your words carefully. They might be more powerful than you realize.
This has been the deep dive exploring the dark and twisted world of the Remedyverse. Thanks for joining us on this mind-bending journey.
And remember, keep the lights on.